we're going to, thanks, Garrett. We're going to then turn it over to our presenters. And just a reminder to everyone to please turn off your microphones. You may want to turn off your cameras when the slides are running, and then we can bring your beautiful images back up when we get to the end of the slides. We're going to run through all of our speakers first. So if you have questions as you go, I would encourage you to please just take some notes so that you don't forget what you want to ask, presenter number one about their paper at the end of the session. So without further ado, and Garrett is going to be our master of the slides, as it were, today. And just a reminder to the presenters, most of the content slides are timed so that it will kind of, carefully move you along in the process. But if you are ready to move, then you just have to tell Garrett and he will click the magic button to change slides for us. Want to bring up the slides
definitely.
there,
Just
Garrett?
let me know. And Lisa, just want to say that once I share and put it on presentation mode, it kind of takes over my screen, so I can't really see anything on the screen.
No worries.
Let's see. How's that? Are we in slideshow mode now?
Not yet.
All right. That's right. There's some trick to that.
It's a test.
Yeah. Oh, you don't see the slideshow?
I think, well, no, we're seeing presenter mode, which gives us 2 slides rather than just regular slideshow mode.
Up at the top, the display settings button should give you a way to swap presenter, and all the way at the top where it says show taskbar, display settings, and slideshow. Yeah, pull down
under display settings.
Uh-huh.
Yay, there we are. Beautiful. Gold star. All right. Thank you very much for your help, Letty. All right. Well, welcome to the launch party. I have put on here that it is the 24th or the 25th of February, depending on what part of the world you're in. For me, it is early morning here in Melbourne. So welcome. And it's shaping up to be a beautiful sunny day. I'm sure some of you are buried in snow, so I won't gloat too much about the weather here. I'll just get you to click the first slide there, Garrett. Fabulous. So I've said here, ARIST is back again. It's really exciting to be presenting on the second issue of the rejuvenated ARIST. If you were here last year for the launch party, we had 7 papers that we presented, 7 papers in that first issue, and we're already up to 10 reviews in this second issue. We're going to hear from 8 of our author teams today. So a little bit of teasers on most of these papers, which is fantastic. And just a reminder that ARIST sits under the kind of JASIST umbrella. So we have moved from being in book form originally, when everyone would write various review chapters, into now actually having these papers available as part of the JASIST suite. So we're almost like a special issue of JASIST. And what that means is that each of the authors, when a paper is accepted, ready for publication, it goes into early view, the same way that other JASIST papers do. And that means that people don't have to wait. You can put this on your course syllabi. You can share it with your friends very quickly, even though then we package everything together each January to present you with the full collection. So many thanks to our authors. Obviously could not do it without you, and especially also to our editorial board members, many of whom I see on the call today. They are absolutely a dream team to work with, and we aim to make sure that everybody is kind of shepherded through the process as quickly and seamlessly as we can. Next slide, Garrett. For those of you who are coming new to ARIST, or you haven't actually taken the time to read all the way through the website about our kind of mission in life, What we do is we publish comprehensive systematic reviews of various types of reviews. You don't have to do systematic. It could be a scoping review. There are lots of different approaches that can be taken to these, but the key thing is that it really is intended to represent all of the different kinds of subtopics and sub areas that we explore within the field of information science, as well as kind of cognate, additional areas just around technology studies, archives, computing. So it's quite a broad mandate in terms of what you can look to ARIST for in terms of the types of reviews that you need, but also the breadth of topic that you might want to cover if you yourself want to be an author. Our critical piece here is really to kind of give people an historic overview, but also a discussion of contemporary trends, and to always make sure that we're doing that within a global context. So we encourage all of our authors to really think beyond the country that they might be situated in, or even where maybe most of the work is done, to really give a bit of a state of the art around the globe of what is this topic and where are we up to. But these reviews are used by absolutely everybody. Certainly doctoral students, when they're working on their proposals and their theses, really find these reviews helpful. But even for grant writing, many people rely on ARIST reviews to give a bit of that state of the art when they're selling themselves to a granting agency. Next slide. We have a two-step process for ARIST. So if you've not been through this process before, the very first step is actually very light touch. You just have to come with an amazing idea, something that you want to pitch to us. And we ask you for a very short, what I think of as, a one-pager that really explains the proposal you want to cover, the significance of it, the scope, what it is you want to bring to the readership. You have to nominate a couple of potential reviewers so that we get a feel for who would be the right people to look at this review. And as well, you get to nominate the timeline for publication. So in that respect, it's quite flexible for authors because we're not fully dictating the timeline, you are. And that really helps us also to build a pipeline. So I can already start to see, issue number 3, issue number 4 into the future. We've had a few people, for example, who are getting ready to go on sabbatical, and writing an ARIST review is going to be part of their sabbatical plan. So if you're thinking about, writing a paper, you do not have to have the paper crafted. Maybe you've just done a skeleton outline, you have a feel for it, you know who your co-authors are going to be. That is the perfect time to get an EOI into the mix. We will review that as quickly as we can, usually within about a week, to give you that assurance. And sometimes we come back with questions. We might ask for some revisions on it. Once we're happy, we then say you're good to go to write that full manuscript. And then we wait until that full manuscript comes in, and that goes through a full peer review process, just the way any other kind of a paper would. Next slide, Garrett. You can find more details about us on our website, but certainly please feel free to reach out either to Garrett or myself personally, or at the arist@asis.org email. We're very happy to entertain any questions that you may have, and I hope that the EOI process also is just kind of seamless and answers most of your questions. But we love to hear from you, so don't feel shy about that. Garrett, next slide, please. I think we're going to be over to our first presenter. So what we've done here is our papers are in the order in which they appear in the issue. So paper number 1 means that's the first one that is in the issue. As we go through today, because we don't have all of our authors here, you're going to see some numbers skip, but don't worry, that's intentional. It's just the listing of where they're going to sit on the cover title page of the full issue. So without further ado, I think it is over to Chris.
Hi there. Is my sound all right for everyone?
Perfect. Thank you so much.
That's good. All right. Well, I'm talking on behalf of a team of 4. As you can see, we are quite a mixed group, but we have worked together on previous kind of bibliographies of sense making in the past. Bonnie uses Derwin's sense making in her work and digital business transformation at AstraZeneca, and is doing a lot of work on AstraZeneca's use of generative AI at present. Louisa was one of my doctoral students, and she used Derwin's sense making for her PhD thesis. And Dave Snowden had lots of contact with Brenda, and he's developing ideas using sense making, but also developing about working in complex decision making, complex systems. So that's our background and his knowledge management as well for Dave. Next slide, Garrett. Right, well, what we were planning to do for this was to look at, maybe I can go a little bit around really more the background of where this makes it look as if it was a very clear-cut process. And in fact, it actually wasn't. We had been doing some sense-making review work earlier. I thought we might be having another update to this particular publication and I thought perhaps doing an ARIST review would help. What actually happened was that it was that other publication didn't transpire. However, we proceeded with the ARIST work, and I think that was probably the best thing to do. Now, what we wanted to do, we were aware that there were very many different concepts and approaches to sense making, coming from different disciplinary perspectives. So lots of people talk about sense making, but what they mean might differ markedly from people in another discipline. So it's messy. So we looked at some recent studies. Now, we focus this time on obviously information science, but we also thought it was important to look at a similar group on sense-making studies in education research. The education research actually was one of these accidents. I found that when I did a little study using Web of Science to see what disciplines were using sense-making, to my surprise and to some extent horror, I found a very large group of sense-making studies in education that I'd never, this was quite novel. I had no idea that this existed. So we thought we'd better have a look at this group, and they actually did prove very useful. And finally, for the objective of the review, as Lisa said, looking at future directions for sense-making, what's the contribution to information science and where might it go? Next slide, Garrett. So we didn't start from a completely blank sheet, as I've said. We had previous bibliography work. We have the sensemaking.org website, our own research experience doing sense-making in the workplace, and also doing research and doctoral research. I have to say that what happened also during the process of doing the ARIST review, that Brenda Dervin died, and which meant that our mentor was no longer there to help us. This was quite a shock to us all. And also I always have this feeling that someone's looking at my work to see whether it's up to scratch or not. We generally updated our resources and used systematic review principles to try and collect the literature. And also, it wasn't just a review of the literature. We have to try and put this material together. As I've said, it's a very complicated and messy area. So we really demanded an approach of meta-synthesis to try and draw some lessons out for everyone. So we were not looking through the studies necessarily for, this is a very good research study. We wanted to choose case studies that were actually useful, critical learning for us. And we were particularly interested in the methodology. And we weren't just thinking about the methods. We were interested in the principles that people were applying and whether they applied those principles throughout their research. So it was a very careful selection of case studies, and then thematic analysis followed from that. Next slide, Garrett.
Sure thing. Just to jump in and say, I think our timer is not working, so I'll just kind of click along after
Well,
about a minute.
I was wondering whether I would get a sort of gong at this point.
Generous minute.
No, well, do stop me if I'm rabbiting on too much. Anyway, our key findings. Well, definitely, this is a question of warnings as well as just straight advice. There are a lot of different meanings of the same term. In fact, I think the situation was more complicated and more complex than I thought it was. Collective sense making can mean completely different things depending on whether you're in education research or in organizational sense making in crisis situations. Connective sense making was an interesting one that came from social media studies, meaning that sort of sense making you get in so-called virtual communities. It's really just a sort of very loose connection. We found, as far as the methods were concerned, that sense-making approaches were often used in combination with other methods, and often quite successfully as well. There was some emphasis on approaches that used Dervin's dialogic approaches, and looking at sense-making, sense-unmaking, but other disciplines would use that as sense breaking. There's limited detail on methods in journal articles if you're trying to find details, actually helpful details on the methodology. Certainly, I would advise other doctoral students, particularly, look at other doctoral research. Look at other research reports. There are blogs, and there's also the sensemaking.org website that does have a lot of doctoral research on it as well. Right, next slide. So, concluding thoughts. You think you need to be aware there are very different perspectives on sense making, including some people that come across and use the term anew again. So it's very difficult. One thing you have to be clear about is what's the background? What is the background experience of the authors? How are they using the term sense making? Are they influenced by any of the main, what I would call the main disciplinary perspectives or not? And another problem is that some people may be thinking they're using the term sense making, meaning a Viking organizational sense making approach, but actually they may be closer to Dervin's sense making in how they've actually applied their methods. This idea of triangulation is important in a way, trying to make sense of sense making using sense making, if that's not too complicated. It is a journey of sense making, and I think Brenda Dervin used the term epistemic humility is required. You have to listen to people. And I found that actually doing the process of the sense-making review and synthesis myself, you have to think, how are these researchers applying this method? why did they do what they did? And for me, personally, it was often, for me, making sense of sense-making, because my background and contribution to the previous bibliographies had been to help Brenda Dervin with the other sense-making perspectives. I had left Brenda quite justifiably. She was responsible for talking about Dervin's sense-making, but there were other approaches that I was doing, and the other members of the team commented on other aspects as well. So for me, it was very much a journey through this, and trying to see what people were thinking, why they thought that, and where we could apply those other people's learning. And the future, well, there is a lot of technical stuff on expanding sensory capabilities for people. Thank you. I think your timer is now worked, Gerard.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Garrett. Next slide, please. So, artificial intelligence has an explainability crisis. The complexity and the opacity of AI has really undermined public trust in the technology and eroded accountability as well. The field of explainable AI has really struggled with opening the black box and understanding what's going on. And it's quite reasonable for users to ask, if artificial intelligence is so smart, why can't it explain itself? So from this challenge, a new sort of subfield of explainable AI has arisen: human-centered explainable AI. HCXAI, as it is known, is more of a holistic view of explainability, putting people rather than technology at the center. So the paper I wrote really does a thematic analysis of human-centered explainable AI, and it focuses on those key concepts in the idea, the issues that have arisen, and the desiderata around what needs to happen to make it more robust. Next slide, please. So the key paper in this is a 2020 paper from Ishan and Rydell that really signals the break with what I might call algorithmic explainability. So the black box model of trying to uncover the algorithms of these systems. And this is where the human-centered approach really takes a new direction. And this paper, the 2020 paper, really outlines the key issues, the new approach, and lays I guess the research groundwork for future work. But I think the core observation from this paper and their early work is, and I quote, "Not everything that is important lies inside the black box of AI. Critical insights can lie outside it. Why? Because that's where the humans are," unquote. So as a result of this initial paper, others soon followed, expanding the ideas and refining them in a variety of different ways and through a different media. There were lots of conferences that took this as a focus, and lots of obviously independent work. But I wanted to say that what really happened during this period is the algorithmic AI continued, but this alternative really evolved and became really a compelling alternative for looking at AI and being able to explain it in various ways. And that's one of the themes I tracked in the paper. Next slide, please. So human-centered XAI takes a full AI lifecycle approach. And regardless of that, the center of that approach is really the user in context. So the real key questions in this work is who, when, why, what. And all the design strategies, the techniques and methods, and the oversights really focus around that core perspective, the user. What is their perspective and how is it advanced with various types of explainability? So I just picked out 4 themes from what are a large number involved in this field, and we'll just briefly review them. One is taking essentially a socio-technical approach. That holistic approach is important. It's making explanations contestable and actionable. So they have to be useful and be able to debate it in some fashion. They need to be interactive. It really encourages reflection over acquiescence. So helping users really critique what they're seeing as opposed to simply accepting it as a given fact. And finally, the hope is that through explanations and through various systems interventions, more information can be provided to the user so they can actually make self-explanations. They themselves can come up with the explanations that make sense in their context. Next slide, please. So if I was to explain maybe the core of what this field is trying to do, I would say that it tries to make all of us explainability activists. We really need to see explainability as a core function in the work we do with this technology. And 4 things maybe could advance that. One is certainly taking the principles and methods of human-centered XAI and using them and employing them as much as possible. Another is, and working with that, is really focusing on AI literacy for our users to ensure they have the skills to be able to navigate through this. We also, I think, need to embed explainability in regulations. We need regulatory support for this. That's going to be challenging in this day and age, but those would support building explainability into these tools from a legislative regulatory perspective. And lastly, and this may be relevant to this group, we need to build or at least encourage critical making so that explainability is built in to the various systems and services that we create with AI. And then we can advance a continuation of this approach to explainability. So we really don't know what's going to happen with this field as it evolves, but it's clear that it has already made a significant mark in the explainability crisis, and we'll see where it takes it. Thanks very much.
Nora, are
Good.
you on the call, Nora? Oh, yeah.
Yes, good.
Thank
Good
you.
evening from northern Finland. And I think I just want to acknowledge my co-authors, but then we can go to the first slide. So our review focuses on the concept of cognitive authority. This concept is known to be coined, or at least extensively developed, by Patrick Wilson in his 1983 book, Secondhand Knowledge, where Wilson claims that beyond their immediate experiences, people evaluate knowledge based on the cognitive authority of information source, meaning the extent to which a source is deemed credible and trustworthy. And in our review, we wanted to understand how this concept has been treated in empirical research, both in terms of conceptualization and methodologically. We can move to the next slide. We conducted a systematic search in multiple academic databases using the exact term cognitive authority in its singular and plural forms, and screened 235 articles to identify those that fit our predetermined criteria, and ended up with 40 peer-reviewed journal articles, both from LIS and from neighboring fields. And as this was a scoping review, our goal was to have an overall understanding of the body of research on cognitive authority. And more specifically, we wanted to see if we could identify diverse strands of research that reflect different conceptualizations and methodological starting points. Next slide, please. The central finding of our review was the identification of 4 strands of research that are illustrated in this slide. We found studies exploring how individuals judge information sources based on quality indicators, including indicators of cognitive authority. Studies examining cognitive authority as something collaboratively constructed and negotiated. Study that explored cognitive authority as part of a belief system, small world, community, or a sphere of interest. And finally, studies using the concept to refer to the legitimacy of science or professions. And well, in the article, you can read more about how these understandings were reflected in research methods across the different settings. We can go to the final slide. For us, it was interesting to see that the development of the identified lines of research or strands of research appeared as parallel to each other. They had developed side by side during the 25 years of research we reviewed. And they appeared to point to different scales of human action, so including individual, community, and social levels, each of which we thought at least that the notion of cognitive authority appeared to have unique value in comparison to other related concepts, as it provides a way to, at the same time, characterize the credibility and influence of information sources. However, based on this review, at least, the latter mentioned aspect, so the influence of sources remains rather unexplored. So future work is needed in this area. Thank you.
I'm going to do a quick audio check, make sure folks can hear me.
Sounds good, yes.
Well, great. Thanks, folks. I'm presenting on behalf of myself and my co-author and the corresponding author for this, Valerie Vera. We're going to talk about the role of information and communication technologies in disclosing and reporting sexual assault. Do want to put the caveat that this is obviously a sort of difficult and complex topic, so if you need to step away, I understand and implore you and encourage you to do so if you feel the need. This came out of interest that we had shared when we were both PhD students about sort of rolling out at our university of yet another attempt for an ICT to help solve disclosure or solve perceived sexual assault problems through disclosure and sort of seeing the sort of its failed ability to affect change. And sort of we're hoping out of this to qualify disclosure practices on ICTs beyond just legalistic means. You can see the research questions there. I think we backtracked slides on accident. Yeah, so there's the 3 questions that the research project is hoping to address about affordances for ICTs, sort of how disclosure is framed, and sort of if that shifts across ICTs. Next slide, please. So for the sake of this systematic review, ICTs were sort of under the range of 2007 to 2021. So, some prominent ICTs like TikTok certainly weren't in there. A limited definition, albeit, but we used the then 2021 CDC definition of sexual assault for this project. Articles were included if the participants were primarily were survivors of sexual assault at young adulthood, 18 to 29 is how we define that. And that they used ICTs to disclose their sexual assault. And we did this within the United States because of sort of larger perceptions of like legal rules around these practices. Databases ranged across a lot of different ones, whether Medline or PsycInfo, but also sort of social work, more humanistic places like Women's Studies International. Combined terms like information communication technology, sexual assault, and disclosure. There's a obviously larger map of how we excluded and included things. We all resulted with 23 articles, used Rayon for analysis. Key findings from this are that the affordances of ICTs sort of led to what types of disclosure or the perceived value of that disclosure. So social network sites, your Facebooks, your X, helped with visibility. You can think here of things like the Me Too movement, but also helped sort of name and make that experience known, whereas blog-based platforms, WordPress, things like this, Tumblr, tended to have an anonymity, sort of opposite value here, where people could talk about these experiences in ways that allowed them to speak through them without necessarily being known who it was, and helped to sort of destigmatize things in the process as well. And then when it came to the sort of disclosure acts that were based on the ICTs, what we sort of found was that a lot of this had to do with communal affirmation. And this could be the idea that people wanted a space to describe and talk about their experiences in ways they felt were detached from legal records that removed, sort of age and experiences and locations of which things happened, and the sort of larger counter discursive practices that came along with that. Just a couple of concluding thoughts here. Disclosure is multifaceted. Survivors often navigate multiple factors, and the sort of disclosure via these ICTs still sort of holds true here as well. Anonymity is a vital in assuring a holistic representation of these experiences, particularly if there are sites that are multiple sites of marginality or stigmatization. Also sort of see persistent issues of safety in making visible disclosure. This really isn't a surprise for the finding per se, but also that visibility is a sort of positive community building collective action. But of course, visibility is not a sort of shared and universal value to this. And then finally, social and cultural implications. These sort of ICTs, as we sort of see here, help to amplify voices and stories. They can also combat myths and stereotypes, but also do not redress larger intersectional discrepancies within sexual assault victim disclosures. Thank you so much.
Great. Hope you can hear me. Hello from not so late late evening here from Sweden then. The night was in Finland, but still quite late. I'm going to present to you briefly the work I did with Tim Gorishanos, who's unfortunately teaching at the moment and couldn't join us today. And the topic of the paper is nothing less than information behavior research within a fairly short time frame, considering how a long time this line of work has been around, both in information science in general and also a part of ARIST. And as a sort of a background, so I can maybe kind of disclose that we were more or less kind of both kind of headhunted for this process to kind of engage in this kind of an endeavor. Now I'm just kind of keeping on talking and wondering whether the slides are changing automatically or not, but if they aren't, so okay, they are, or Garrett, you did something wonderful. Thank you very much. Yes, what we did look into was information behavior and practice research, and kind of from the perspective that information behavior is one of the core topics in information science. And as I already hinted, though, so, and we probably all know, there have been regular ASIS reviews on information behavior and user perspective since 1960s in our publication. Then what we did here, so we had to kind of sort of relate our work to the main review of information behavior research, where our eminent editor-in-chief of ARIST is also very much involved, the volume Looking for Information, and that was kind of sort of in preparation at the same time than our work was. So we kind of sort of shifted what we planned to do from doing a kind of comprehensive review of everything to doing a trends review. How we did it, so we did a thematic analysis of literature published between 2016 and 2022, started with a literature search in LISA and LISTA databases, adding some key publications not included in those databases to manually to compensate for possible omissions in those records. We looked into, in total, 2,829 papers, titles, metadata, abstracts, and not reading all of the articles in full text, but of course we went into some more detail with certain key texts on the topic. And now we could maybe kind of move forward, I guess. Yes, what we found that there's a lot of research, as the number of papers clearly indicates. Almost all, or 90%, 91% of the papers we went through were empirical research. There were very few purely conceptual papers. This doesn't obviously mean that there wouldn't be a lot of theory development in much of the empirical research, but still there's a kind of a clear indication of how the work is done. A lot of questionnaire research that has been already kind of observed in previous reviews, Much research on students, also something that's been observed in previous information behavior and practice research. When it comes to countries and populations studied mostly, so there is USA, Nigeria, and India dominate in the analysis, and this is kind of a key observation in a sense that that kind of a lot of information behavior research comes from the global south. The most popular umbrella terms: information behavior, information practices. Information behavior is definitely dominating. Trends are responsive to cultural, socio-political, and technological realities and shifting interests in different aspects of information behavior. We identified certain terms that are relating to actual happenings, technological shifts, societal questions. There's a lot of critique of theoretical information behavior research, and there is still a lot of theoretical information behavior research. And if something would like to be doing something with it, so then there is definitely a room for kind of going there and engaging in information behavior theory development. Some future trends that we could kind of see that weren't kind of really trends yet. So new technologies are probably quite apparently starting to have an impact on ongoing information behavior research. And there are also interesting things and observations being on the exchanges between information behavior research and systems design that has been sort of emerging for quite a long time. There might be something happening, and it's very interesting to see what's going to happen during the next few years. And yes, thank you for this.
All right, hello everyone. My name is Luke, and I'm from the University of Tennessee at Knoxville in the southern US, as are my two co-authors, Dr. Devendra Potnis and Dr. Iman Tahamtan. So we can go ahead and dive into the next slide, please. Thank you. So our central research question here was, what are the negative consequences of information gatekeeping through algorithmic technologies, or AT, as I'll refer to them throughout the rest of the presentation. So by information gatekeeping, we mean the filtering of information and the controlling of its flow, which is a definition we got from Shoemaker and Voss and Barzilai Naihan. And by algorithmic technologies, or AT, we mean that we're looking at artificial intelligence, decision support systems, hashtags, online gaming platforms, search engines, and Web 3.0. So our present study actually built on a previous 2021 study by my two co-authors, in which they classified and looked at the ways that hashtags perform various gatekeeping mechanisms. And in that study, they focused mainly on the utility and usefulness of hashtags. So it was a bit of a contrast to our current study, which is looking more at the negative effects. For our methods, we performed a state-of-the-art review. So we looked at the research field as it currently stands. We searched a wide range of databases, Web of Science, ScienceDirect, ProQuest, etc., as well as journals in various disciplines. And our search terms aligned with 6 gatekeeping mechanisms that had been previously defined in that 2021 paper. And we searched for those terms in combination with the algorithmic technologies that I mentioned, the AT. An example of a mechanism that we looked for would be broadcasting information. This is embedding data into a message and disseminating it through various channels. And an example of a negative consequence that we discovered would be a social divide. So this is a consequence that reinforces social or demographic inequalities. So all in all, we parsed through 229 articles for our final paper. 2 key findings that I want to highlight from our analysis. First is that information gatekeeping can result in a chain reaction of negative consequences. So this was a sort of cascading effect that we noticed, where one negative consequence could trigger another consequence, or else two or more consequences could arise simultaneously from one gatekeeping mechanism. And I've got two examples down there. I'll briefly touch on the second one. So looking at semantic models such as ontologies, we found examples of these models omitting, mislabeling, conflating, or obscuring data. And in particular, we looked at an example of agricultural data where scientists, data scientists who were from the global north were labeling data in ways that omitted or obscured definitions of terms that were used in the global south. All right, and in conclusion, we had a couple of different directions for future research for this topic. One is that future research could dive deeper into the ways that algorithms work together to create negative consequences, such as algorithms behind deepfake videos, working in tandem with social media algorithms to spread visibility of those videos. Another path that this research could follow is gatekeeping mechanisms and AT that are described here can also be used to remedy or overcome the same negative consequences that they cause. So kind of using the same framework to reverse the pattern to positive consequences. Thanks very much.
Yeah, good job, Luke. Sorry, Luke was my student. My name is Awa Zhu, also from University of Tennessee. On behalf of my co-authors, I will present some insights from our systematic review of misinformation governance. Next slide, please. In this review, we emphasize the socio-technical nature of misinformation challenge. Misinformation does not exist in a vacuum. People, platforms, regulations, and norms all interact to form a socio-technical ecosystem. Now, within this ecosystem, misinformation can circulate seamlessly across social networks. Therefore, the complexity and impact of misinformation as a governance problem cannot be overstated. And to understand this complexity, we analyzed action arenas, a concept we use to describe the specific aspects of misinformation challenges, such as speech rights, responsibilities, that can be addressed or being addressed within a given set of interactions or processes. Intervention, then, are intentional responses to those action arenas. They can take the form of laws, social norms, technological architecture, and market mechanisms. Methodologically, we conducted a systematic, structured literature review of 277 articles published from 1991 to 2023, selected from nearly 700 results on Web of Science. We searched for works that explicitly addressed misinformation or disinformation, and some other related terms, plus governance, policy, or management, and emphasized social or technical dimensions. The material spans information science, computer science, law, political science, journalism, communication, psychology, sociology, and beyond. Next slide, please. And here are some of our key findings. First, compared to other aspects of misinformation research, governance research lags behind the issues, no surprise, both in volume and in responsiveness. And this corresponds to governance in action, in practice. While the importance of governing misinformation is widely recognized, we found relatively few examples of successful governance interventions, either within the literature or at the level of platform governance or national law. Second, papers that offered multimodal governance suggestions. By this, we mean those that incorporate policy or law and social norms, market-oriented approaches, and technical solutions offer the most robust path forward. And third, our analysis shows disciplinary siloing, uneven geographic coverage, and some other gaps in the current research. So in closing, we would like to suggest some related topics for future reviews, including platform governance mechanisms, comparative policy analysis, civic and grassroots approaches to misinformation challenges, the efficacy of governance, and very importantly, misinformation literacy. As our topic is quite interdisciplinary, we suggest future ARIST writers to think about how best to balance the information science approach and perspective with an interdisciplinary audience. And the body of literature, of course. We also suggest that writers be very intentional and mindful and strategic in your review approach and document each of the choices you make about the inclusion criteria, coding process, and so on. Thank you so much.
All right, I'm going to get my timer started. So this research team, we started off looking at transitions together, and we moved on to thinking about information avoidance because we found that avoidance was part of the information practices associated with transitions. So next slide, please. As a research team, we wonder whether information avoidance is one of information science's most prominent anomalies. On the one hand, it's been acknowledged as playing a key role within information research, with many calls for further study. And unlike other information practices, it's received a lot of attention from scholars in other disciplines, including health, economics, communication, sociology, and psychology. However, overall, our understanding of information avoidance has remained fairly fragmentary and with much less focus than information seeking has received. So as an authorship team, we show that information avoidance goes beyond simply not seeking information, but includes such practices associated with not creating, not using, and not accepting what is informative. So we argue that information avoidance contrasts with many information practices and not just with information seeking. Next slide, please. We decided on a critical conceptual review, which goes beyond description, includes a degree of analysis and conceptual innovation, and draws from diverse resources. Rather than producing an answer, it typically presents a launch pad for conceptual development and testing, often in the form of a model. Critical reviews take a less structured approach than do other forms of literature review. So rather than employing systematic search criteria, they aim to identify the most significant items. We proceeded abductively, working backwards from existing information avoidance concepts to uncover how they came into existence and then creating an explanatory framework. We searched in information science, psychology, journalism, and health. We searched iteratively and shared our findings. We identified terms, concepts, and definitions used in the items that we retrieved. And then we went through several rounds of collaborative concept mapping to develop 7 initial characteristics of information avoidance. In the prior literature, information avoidance has been defined narrowly, depicted negatively, and generally omitted from information behavior models. And we conceptualized it as consisting of 3 broad categories. Information related, where seeking or avoidance relates to characteristics of the information itself. These include intensity, so the amount, pace, or force of information, and the granularity, the scale of information between source and content. Second are person-related, where seeking or avoidance relates to the characteristics of the individual. So engagement is how invested or involved a person is, so whether active, receptive, or passive. And control is the extent to which the person has or believes they have control over information. And finally, person information related, where seeking or avoidance relate to characteristics of both. So these include relevance, the significance or importance that the person attaches to the information, quality, the authority or credibility that the person attaches to the information, and timeliness, the temporal suitability. So in conclusion, we argue that information avoidance is far from a singular and uncomplicated act, that engagement and avoidance are deeply intertwined, complementary, and dynamic information practices, and that by privileging behaviors and practices associated with information seeking over practices associated with avoidance, information science scholars are only seeing part of the picture. Thanks.
All right. Thank you so much. Thanks, Garrett, for stopping the presentation there. What a fabulous set of papers. It's so exciting. And I love hearing directly from the authors, especially after having read all of these and been buried in them for several months as they went through the review process. It's exciting. We have a few minutes for questions, comments, anything that people would like to share with their colleagues that are here on the call. Or even questions you might have about ARIST. Now, if you're feeling excited and energized and think, "Ooh, I've got a topic, I could do that too." Happy to entertain any questions. So much to think about. As I was listening, I'm always quite amazed at the breadth within our field and the various topics that we're able to cover off and still be connected by this thing, this information thing that draws us all together. It's quite remarkable and very inspiring. I'm not seeing any questions, any comments coming up in the chat. Anyone got their hand up that I can't see? All right, well, I know we're coming up to the hour. Thank you so much for coming out. This is really exciting to see the number of registrations gone up this year. And we certainly welcome any feedback that you have. I'm thinking as we move ahead, if we have all of our authors at the table and we have 10 or 12 papers, we'll probably aim to move this to a 90-minute session, just so that we've maybe got a bit of talk time, if that's not too long for people. But I think, again, the topics are just so amazing, and it is something that the hour just flew right by. So thank you for your attention. Thanks again to our authors. I really appreciate you taking the extra time to put together, your thoughts today. And we really look forward to seeing EOIs from many of you on the call. So have a great time with the rest of your day, and thanks again for coming.